No, first. I think it's better. Okay? It's very easy. Okay? Yeah. Next to more. It's fantastic. Okay? And the more, okay?
Okay, yeah.
Okay? Remember when you start, turn on.
Okay, that should be fine here. Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
Remember, okay?
Yep.
Somebody else. Okay, so welcome to the session 5D on the overall topic of virtual people. This time we'll address the identity federations. Actually, what are the next steps and new technologies that are foreseen in the inter-federational space. And our first speaker is Thomas Langenhager from Switch. And I'm not going to use more time from him. Just let me ask you in advance to fill in your evaluation forms as soon as the session starts, so we are fresh and you have a nice experience from the session. So, Thomas, please.
Thank you, Miro. Welcome to my talk about the SAML2 metadata exchange and metadata tagging. I hope you all attended yesterday's talk, just 24 hours ago in this room, about the Kalmar Union, because that talk was a very good preparation for what I'm discussing here, interfederation mainly, and technologies which help in supporting interfederation in the future. So, a brief overview over my talk. First, problem statement, what do we want to address, and then the two methods of technologies, scalable metadata exchange and metadata tagging. Let's start with the problem statement. The fact today we see more and more national identity federations based on SAML. That's great. The problem, we want to establish something like Schengen for the travelers, and we want to establish that for the whole world. What does mean Schengen for the travelers nowadays? The national borders still exist. However, these borders are no longer barriers for the travelers. And in the talk from yesterday from David Simonson, we heard what's a federation, an identity federation. It's a circle of trust, a circle with a well-defined border. These borders will still exist in the future. However, there shouldn't be any barriers for going to interfederation. So I want to focus now on two technical topics which should finally ease interfederation. Let's start. No, I nearly forgot, and the credits are important here, and acknowledgements, because the following, what I present here, is primarily based on the work and feedback of these good guys. And Jean2 is also a source of information for that, so the credit belongs to all of them, and it's all work in progress and needs quite some more effort to go. And all the errors during this presentation, they are mine. The first topic, scalable metadata exchange. Federations grow, so the metadata files grow. The UK Federation is the best example for that. Its file is growing and growing, and when taking the Kalmar Union as an example, where the metadata of the 4 federations is joined together, that wouldn't scale internationally. A single metadata file is simply unmanageable. However, we want to maintain the direct SAML2-based end-to-end communication. That should be maintained, as also stated in the talk yesterday from Mikhail. So the idea is we don't need to have the complete metadata at all the institutions, at all the entities participating in the identity federation, but we just need the subset of metadata which is really needed for the communication partners. Each entity will only communicate with a set of communication partners, and not the whole world. And at least that's a first attempt which can help in getting interfederation going, and later on it can be moved even further to more dynamic approaches to keep up with the growth. So the ideas presented here are documented in this paper. It was written by Ian Young and Chad Lashwa, and it's entitled Interfederation and Metadata Exchange, Concepts and Methods. A clickable link you find in the slide deck you can download on TNC2009 webpage. Before going there, I just want to introduce some terminology. What we have today with the federations. It's the identity provider, the IDP, to the left-hand side, submits his metadata, the description of his IDP, to the federation provider. The same does the service provider. This depends on the federation, which methods are used, on how you do that. What's the same for all the federations, the federation provider generates a set of metadata, the federation metadata, which is digitally signed. And this is then downloaded by the IDPs and SPs to enable communication, to know who the partners are. And the federation provider therefore has the role as a metadata registrar and as a metadata publisher at the same time. And we have the metadata consumers at the SP and the IDP. And the activities are register metadata, publish metadata, and consume the metadata by pulling it from the publisher. I skip this slide. Federations are trust brokers, and we can distinguish 2 kinds of trust. And I think it makes the problem a bit easier in tackling interfederation. On one hand, we have the technical trust, and this mainly means we need to have trustworthy metadata. And why? This assures secure communication between the participating entities that you can really trust in. This is the endpoint I really wanted to talk to, and not somebody else. And based on this technical trust, we then can build a behavioral trust. And these are mainly policy-based, contract-based, whatever you do and trust in the data you transfer and in the quality of the identity, for example. And in small federations, this can be rather informal. And it's perhaps just by you trust the other institution. You know them so well, they have their reputation. But as soon as we grow to interfederation, the further away the other institutions are and the entities are, the more formal you have to get in this behavioral trust. So now let's get closer to this technical trust for the interfederation and what metadata exchange can help there. I think we could introduce a metadata layer for trustworthy access to this entity metadata. And the main block of this metadata layer is the building block of a metadata aggregator. Its functions are rather simple. It aggregates metadata from other metadata publishers. And it optionally accepts entity registrations by itself to bootstrap the whole stuff. But it's also possible to have just aggregators collecting metadata from other sites. And the final thing, just aggregating doesn't help much, so you do publish the metadata for your consumers. And that the consumers can get some trust into what's published there, what happens really at this aggregator, I think it will be necessary to have some aggregation practice statement as well as some registration practice statement. On this basis, it's then possible to decide what does this aggregator really do. Is this a process I can follow? Does this aggregator provide the kind of services I expect as a consumer of its metadata? What does it mean for an entity? It's not much else than what we had in the past. The entity registers its own metadata with a metadata aggregator, and it consumes the metadata as an entity collection from this metadata aggregator. This means the metadata aggregator is then able, or its service should be, that it provides specific collections suitable for an individual entity, what they want to have as communication partners. So this will decide on which metadata aggregator is chosen, the kind of services provided by them. In the picture it doesn't look much different than before with federation provider. So a federation provider can as well be a metadata aggregator. The activities are still the same. However, with looking at the metadata layer, now we have a collection of metadata aggregators which can communicate with each other. So scalability of metadata, that's the main idea you get through a mesh of these metadata aggregators. That could still be a hierarchy, but it hasn't to be, because hierarchies sometimes are not the best solution for a global problem. But if you want to have a hierarchy, that's still possible, but most likely the real-world situation is better handled by some mesh of metadata aggregators. Entities will choose their preferred metadata publisher according to their needs, according to their requirements. So what needs to be defined, and there is a first draft available about it, is this protocol to retrieve metadata from some metadata publisher. And this is a RESTful retrieval protocol, and it's not much else than what we have already implemented in our SAML implementations in use today in our federations. You configure a URL and you retrieve the metadata from there. What comes in addition is that you can also define which subset, for example, you want, or whether you just want to have a specific entity ID and get that kind, the metadata of this entity, and not a full bunch. Today, you just get all entity ID, all entities get the full metadata of the federation. So this protocol will allow to be more specific and more tailored to the customer. The components of such an aggregator, on the first hand, it's the metadata registrar component, which registers the incoming client entities. Then we have some subscription component, which reaches out and fetches metadata from other aggregators. Then, the most important part of the aggregator, I think, is really the transformation, which can happen on this metadata. This means filtering of metadata. Which entities are important for my communities, for my customers? And that is based on suitable criteria, and this reaches out to the metadata tagging I'm covering later on. And then it's also necessary to merge metadata because you have multiple sources, and define the rules on which you do conflict resolution in case you get the same information from multiple sources, which could happen. And the last one is the component of publishing the metadata. The entities you register locally at the metadata aggregator, they most likely expect from the aggregator that it publishes the information about this entity as widely as possible, that all the other partners who want to communicate with this entity gets to know about it. On the other hand, the same entities expect from the metadata aggregators just to get that subset of information they want to communicate with and not the whole world. So it will be necessary to configure on this metadata aggregator the requirements of the different entities of with which kind of communities they want to communicate. For example, the web single sign-on community of EduGain could be one such set of metadata, but it could also be the Greek community. That this is criteria for filtering. So it will be up to the end entities to decide what they want, and meta aggregator will have to provide what the customers want. So we come to the filtering, and the basis for filtering is we need to enrich the metadata, the SAML2 metadata, by criteria on which we can do some filtering. And we can add some description to the entity information in SAML2 metadata. And that's what the UK is already doing since quite a while. A very simple way the UK uses now: shall this identity provider show up in the where are you from server, for example, or not? That's a criteria which is mapped into the metadata by the UK Federation today. That's not so much useful in a global scope, but still it was the first approach and brought the idea up in using some such tags. More important, I think, in the future will be some third parties who assert that an entity meets some qualification, and by that it provides an assertion which is digitally signed, and based on it you can decide whether you want to trust this entity or not. So the proposed mechanism here is to use an XML extension which doesn't break metadata interoperability of SAML2 metadata. And Scott Cantor already a while ago submitted a proposal in it for introducing entity attributes suitable as tags for entities in metadata. In SAML, we know about the attributes describing a user, surname, last name, whatever, these kind of attributes. These entity attributes will describe entities, not users. So we need also a new set of attributes which we then can add into the metadata. But this committee draft at the moment at OASIS, this one specifies how such an extension can be put into metadata. A clickable URL you find also in the slide deck. So what is the entity attribute about? This is part of this, these are extractions out of the specification. So the extension entity attribute is just a wrapper for either a SAML attribute or a SAML assertion. Two things we know already very well. A single attribute, which, like the UK attribute, should show up in the wave or not, or a full assertion which is digitally signed and you can verify offline. Each entity which receives the metadata can check it by itself if it wants to. If it's an assertion, it must conform to an assertion profile, which is also defined in this specification. And it also says it should only contain attribute statements and nothing else in this assertion. And the assertion profile, the main thing of that is within the assertion, the name ID should contain the entity ID of the entity you want to describe and for which you do the assertion. So that way the entity ID is digitally bound into the statement about this entity, and you can really check this assertion was issued just for this entity. And the next point here, relying parties must process assertions in accordance with the standard processing rules in SAML2 core. This just means we can reuse the existing software we already have in processing SAML assertions. So that's a good thing for lowering the barrier of an implementation. You don't have to write that much code. And then the last point here, the entity attributes element, is used within an extensions element. That just means the scope of what you say about what you express with an attribute is limited to the entity ID in which it is contained. That's a rather natural way. So what you can gain with tagging the entities and what remains to be done. As I said, with describing entities, we need a new set of attributes we find useful. So first we have to come forward with new definitions for these kind of attributes. We now have a definition for a container where we can map it into metadata, but the content, what we want to put there, we still have to come forward with proposals. Like, for example, the UK thing with it should show up in a wave, or perhaps we better define more logical or more scalable attributes. So this is a job to be done by federations as well as the bodies coordinating inter-federation. And an example here for what could be expressed in an assertion. That organization X, for example, the trusted third party, asserts that an entity Y was audited according to a defined policy. And if they did it, they generate such an assertion, including an attribute describing that it's this profile against which we check that, and it can have some expiration information in it and so on. And then this information, the complete assertion with the digital signature, can be put into the entity metadata. So entity metadata will grow a bit, but as we saw beforehand, with the scalable metadata exchange, we have a method in reducing the problem of growing metadata. In order to be useful, these asserting parties will have to define policies which gain wide acceptance. Otherwise, having such an assertion in your entity description doesn't help anything. If it's not accepted by others, why adding it? So the reputation of asserting policies and definitions of policies, for example, this will in the future decide. Oops, that's my timer. This will in the future decide whether these criteria are accepted by the entity ID entities consuming the metadata. This leads me to my summary. What are the main points of my talk? It's really scalable technical trust we can achieve with introducing a metadata layer with metadata aggregators in it. Because that's better scalable than just a federation and growing according that path. And then for the scalable behavior trust, we can support that by defining widely accepted policies and mapping them into asserted tags in metadata. So based on these tags, we can then do the filtering in the aggregators, and that are two parts which will help in solving the inter-federation problem. Now we have to trial it all. It's not yet implemented anything. These are ideas and specification definitions, and we will have to work on the details. So you are kindly invited to help out as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. We have time for a few questions. So here's 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, that would be
more
or less.
Okay, Thomas, thank you for an interesting presentation. I was wondering what kind of use cases you were thinking on about. I can imagine, for example, doing aggregation on a national level, But can you, for example, also imagine a virtual home organization running its own aggregator for the IDPs that are interesting for them?
Yes, it's really open. EduGame could also be a single aggregator aggregating from all the participating federations. Then we would have a hierarchical scheme, but also bigger virtual organizations spanning multiple countries, a lot of IDPs and service providers. They could just aggregate what they need. And depending on their service providers, if they only want to get this kind of information from these virtual organizations, then they can adopt this information. And the virtual organization aggregator would then perhaps provide its aggregate to a national federation in order to get it down to the end entities. But that's really open. End entities will be able to choose where to find what they really want.
Okay, so that would lead to having the virtual organization popping up in a "Where are you from" list or something like that in the end.
Could be part of it because you know then this entity belongs to this virtual organization or not. And yes, that's open some possibilities there.
Hi, Thomas. Andy Powell from EduServe in the UK. The W3C have done a huge amount of work on globally scalable approaches to metadata in the form of semantic web and linked data and the sharing of ontologies through things like OWL. I just wondered if there's been work done on looking at that in the context of SAML metadata and that it's been rejected, or whether it simply hasn't been looked at.
I personally haven't looked up, but as I said, this is mainly also based on work from others, not really on my ground. So, but I take it up as a thing to check out how much it was already, how much it has influenced already this. Thank you.
Diego, I think. And then David, I think.
Recently you have been involved in some discussions inside, there's a community about interoperability of different identity protocols called Concordia. And they are wondering about what they call whitelisting, which is listing those IDPs that you trust in. I think this is completely aligned with those ideas. But my question is about how do you think that references to non-SAML endpoints could be included here?
Very easily, as long as it's XML-based. These aggregators should be as generic as possible, not really limited to SAML only. But when you can add some attribute extensions, for example, to other XML structures describing some other kind of endpoints, and you would add some attribute statements or assertions as it was presented here, then it's easy to do the same kind of filtering on it. Otherwise, it would have to know about some other filtering. But I think, it's open, and aggregators can be built simply supporting just SAML or also support other protocols, I guess.
And what about your plans or the plans that people you are speaking on behalf of about making this part of the standard? I mean, this is a kind of addition that would make this standard much more valuable in the future.
Yes. So the proposal for the extension, this is already on the OASIS standards to be submitted, is already submitted there and should be accepted hopefully sometime in the future, because I don't think many people will have anything against that kind of proposal. Then the retrieval protocol, that has to be standardized as well. And the idea is really to start very simple and then come forward with the documentation. It's just currently not yet on any web page, so I can't refer to it, but it will surely be circulated soon, for example, on the TF-EMP Square list or so, that as many people as possible can see it. It's just not that advanced yet that the first draft was published.
I think we have time for one more question.
you. The concept of tagging, when you have a concept of grouping metadata, why do you need the tagging?
You mean the entity descriptors?
Yes.
Grouping several entities together.
Yeah, you could use the same concept of grouping, aggregation, for every IDP that has the tag, right?
No, entity descriptors. With tags you can have multiple dimensions of grouping things. And with entity descriptors you can group a single block. But it would end up in a hierarchy of what you can express. With tagging you are more flexible and you can do everything.
But all tags will have to end up in a single file, right?
It ends up in a single entity description, yes.
Yeah.
But tags you can get asserted by a third party, sent to you by email, for example, and you attach it into your entity ID, into your entity description, because it contains all information. It has a reference to the entity ID, and it can be merged at a later stage together.
Okay.
So I think it's
Thanks.
provides enough capabilities. Mm-hmm.
We have to rush to second speaker. Thank you again, Thomas.
Thank you. I leave it to you.
Mike, you have to switch the mic.
Yep.
While we are very good. Okay.
Who?
Hello. When I was preparing for the presentation, I was thinking that I would talk about attribute handling in Edugain. But when I wrote in the schedule, I realized that nobody else would talk about Edugain itself. So I think I have to start with an overview of Edugain. But please beware, if you really want to understand Edugain, please check www.edugain.org and the documents there, because what I can give you is just a brief and very distant overview of Edugain, which might be even incorrect. So, Edugain is a confederation of federations. It connects identity federations together while giving identity federations a great autonomy about the protocols inside, the trust relationships inside, and the attribute schema. But on the other hand, Edugain is also software which was developed in Jan 2 by the JRA5 working group, and it was released in April this year. And I hope that it's going to be further maintained by Jan 3. Edugain software contains libraries, bridging elements, and meta directory service. Those colored clouds, which are similar to black boxes, are representing federations, which are connected by obscure black lines, which is Edugain itself. But going a bit near how Edugain operates today. There are so-called bridging elements deployed in each participating federation. And these bridging elements are more or less proxies. And technically, and in pure technical sense, Edugain is a federation of bridging elements. NDS, which is in the center, is a central metadata, which stands for metadata service, is a central metadata source for EduGain bridging elements, and it has some additional features, mostly regarding delegated administration of confederation metadata and some other querying features. Currently, EduGain is running SAML 1.1 with some not too crucial proprietary extensions to the protocol messages. However, there is a consensus on moving to SAML 2 as soon as possible. In bridged mode for the federation, EduGain is represented by the bridging elements, which might be home and remote. In case you are not familiar with these home and remote thing, it's went from the user's perspective, where the user's home organization is, this is the home federation, and the service, and the federation where the service lies is the remote federation. And the IDP is connected to the home bridging element, and the SPs are connected to the remote bridging element. Well, in fact, there might be more than one home or remote bridging element in a federation, but the logic is the same. They are more or less equivalent. A provider can only decide which attributes to send to or exit from EduGain in bridge mode, and you cannot easily distinguish between remote federations and remote providers. And I think breaking this direct trust is the main drawback of the current working mode of EduGain. So, when EduGain was originally designed, federations were using different single sign-on protocols. For example, POPI in Spain and ASELEC in Netherlands and some other protocols. I think at that time nobody was using SAML 2. And while this diversity regarding protocols may still hold at the moment, more or less, it is believed that SAML 2 will be the common protocol or the lingua franca between federations. And I think that this is quite a near future for every federation to move SAML 2. For example, Shibboleth 1.3 will be discontinued from June 2010, I think. This means that protocol translation functionality, which was the main driver for bridging elements, will be becoming less important. So direct connection of individual IDPs and SPs will be or are possible. And in this case, the MDES operates in as a metadata aggregator, how Thomas said just before, which aggregates data from federations. IDPs and SPs are targeting messages directly to each other. And EduGain in a fully connected mode will result in, at least in pure technical sense, in one big federation. I'm not really that experienced long enough with federations to determine whether opening up the closed gardens of the current national federations will be what institutions want or not. I would say that proper application of level of assurance, it must happen before this full educate connection models work. So it must happen before. And this third model is, I think, what we will be seeing in the next 2 or 3 years, which is a hybrid of bridge mode and directly connected mode. And as you may notice, there might be service providers directly connected to EduGain. You can think about some real interfederation services like EduConf, EduRoam, or the Refresh Wiki. I think there might still be some applications which might require some elements in between the resource provider and the IDP, for example, DAMI or non-web SSO profile. But I think this differs from the original fully bridged mode, because in this hybrid mode, entities might be able to communicate directly with each other. Well, turn to attributes. I think the most, at least technically, with federations, the most important things are the attributes. And therefore, every federation has its own attribute specification, or at least an attribute requirements document. And I think that EduGain cannot create an ultimate specification that is based on a common subset. So I think the common subset will be so tight that it might be unusable. And moreover, there might be some federations which might be using EduGain, but they might want to develop stronger relationships, which might result in exchanging additional attributes or more specific bilaterally agreed attributes. Well, there are some challenges with attribute conversion. I think it's not a generally solvable problem in theory, but there are some quite easy cases. I think the Swiss do not support eduperson principal name, but they can easily derive that information from an attribute called Swiss eduperson unique ID, which is, I think, holds the same information. So only renaming the attribute is necessary. But well, sometimes the thing is quite as easy as the first one. So merging two attributes, the eduperson affiliation and the home organization, to a scoped affiliation value, I think it's easily solvable by computing. So I think that shouldn't mean a burden for interconnecting federations. But there are some harder problems. Semantic differences may be very hard to solve. You can think of eduperson affiliation. There are federations which assigning eduperson affiliation student values to pupils, but there might be other federations that do not allow that. There are some cases when the appropriate attribute value can be taken from other attributes, so a constellation of other attributes, for example, the home organization type. And I think the SHAC schema is very good about representing different semantic meanings in attribute values by using URLs. And I think mapping URN values is much easier than combining some exotic attributes together. Well, last year for EduGain we developed an attribute conversion and filtering library, which became part of the EduGain 1.0 release, and it builds into the bridging element, and it implements that conversion and filtering logic. It's configurable via XML files, and you can put regular expressions inside in XML. I will show you that XML language in more detail later. But this is the model in which attribute handling is imagined in EduGain. So an identity provider produces some attributes in home format. The bridging element might be built inside the identity provider, so these green and the orange boxes don't necessarily distinct entities. But the identity provider produces the data in some format, and it is run through conversion logic first, and then a filtering logic, and then it is released. Then the attributes are released to EduGain, and I hope that quite soon there will be an EduGain common attribute specification, which is appropriate for most interfederating scenarios, but there is a possibility to use bilaterally agreed attribute sets. So these attributes are transmitted over the wire to the resource provider's side, and then there the bridging element or the resource provider itself runs the attributes through a filtering logic and the conversion logic, and the conversion logic converts the received attributes into the service provider's format of attributes. Well, and just a couple of XML examples to show how to implement these conversion challenges. Well, the most basic thing is to produce a new attribute for users, which might be a so-called federation attribute, which can be appended to the user's attribute set. And the other example is to rename an attribute from Swiss eduperson unique ID to eduperson principal name. Well, you can twist the two, and you can have the logic the other way around. You can split an attribute to several pieces, not necessarily two, but to any pieces, with using these regular expressions and regular expression grouping things. And I think it's a neat thing to have optional attributes, and I think it can be applicable with direct IDP connections as well, because there might be attributes that can be filled in by the user himself, and but these attributes might be optional. And for example, if a user fills in the preferred language attribute, then this value will be respected, but otherwise a common default can be applied as a preferred language by using that negate true option in the XML. There is another problem with eduperson targeted ID. Many federations implemented eduperson targeted ID as a scoped attribute, which is quite easy to represent and quite easy to use. However, according to Internet 2, this is incorrect. use of eduperson targeted ID, because a targeted ID shall contain a triplet of information containing the targeted ID itself, the issuer, and the recipient of the ID, and therefore Internet 2 recommends to use SAML2 name IDs in eduperson targeted ID. I don't know how many federations are using targeted ID this way, but this is how Internet 2 recommends it. So by using that XML syntax, you may rewrite eduperson targeted ID to the newer format. Well, you don't need to understand each and every line in this example, but after, if you can download the slide, you can check it. So the necessary information can be mapped together. Well, just one slide about attribute filtering, because it's very much the same as attribute conversion. It can allow or deny releasing or exception of attributes. These rules can be based on attribute name and value and the remote peer's name, and each condition can be a regular expression, and you can combine every of the above. And although the conversion and filtering library was originally developed for the Java, more specifically to the shibboleth bridging element, we have just finished to implement a simple SAML PHP module implementing the same XML-based logic. So you can use the same XMLs inside simple SAML PHP, and you can use them not only when you are implementing a simple SAML PHP bridging element, but as a standalone IDP or SP. And I think it might fit for cases where you can transform the attributes, and the transformation is not that obvious. And I think currently the core simple SAML PHP filtering does not allow to filter for the values of the attributes, but can only filter attributes for attribute names. And by using this XML-based syntax, you can filter for them as well. So you can check the documentation on the EduGain wiki, and you can have the EduGain, the simple SAML PHP module from the second link. Thank you.
Thank you, especially thank you for ending on time, so allowing us to have some questions. So
no, I was just wondering why you have considered the possibility of making this kind of attributes conversion a service, an intermediate service, instead of putting it as a simple filter of a piece of. I have seen some papers that if I remember what was a proposal for the grid environment, what they call that a credential conversion service.
And I've seen that paper as well.
Yeah, well, I would like not to talk about a centralized service. This is another service you offer in your, maybe centralized or not, but offering a web service interface to the whole thing.
Well, I think it's feasible. So if you develop a web interface, a web service interface ahead of this logic, then you are done. So I think it might be centralized, but at the moment it's inside Edugain library and it's a simple PHP module. So the current implementation is not ready for that, but I think it's not a big deal.
More questions?
I would just like to add that, well, I'm not sure if anyone from JISC is here, but regarding the semantic differences between the attributes, JISC did an investigation into the differences in between federations and what they mean by what. So that might be interesting. And I think in the last research meeting there was also sort of agreement that this might be an interesting thing to do for all federations. So we have a common idea of how attributes are used, but again, this will not be solvable in a technical way.
Yep. Some more? If not, I have one. Sorry for maybe you have said that, but are there any practical productional experience? Somebody is using this in production for real services?
Well, the Java library is in production since it is it's included in Edugain 1.0. So as far as we can call the current Edugain implementations or deployment as a production ones, then I would say these are in production.
So no federation is using that?
I think every shibboleth bridging element is using that.
Thank you again.
Is it working? Yeah. You can hear me? You can turn on the volume. It's something with my ear is not working. Like this? Okay, thank you. Yeah, good point. So, modo pantalla completa. So I'm going to talk about logout. My name is Andreas Solberg. I'm from Norway, from UNIMET, National Research Network. First, let's start with looking into session and what is that single sign-on. This is familiar to you. I'm just refreshing it so you have it clear in memory when we start moving out to over to logout. So originally HTTP was a stateless protocol. There was some additional standard added to it, which you know as cookies. So with HTTP you use cookies to keep states. Cookies work this way. You send a request to the service and you get back a set cookie header, setting in often if you are wanting to establish a session with a browser or the user, you generate an ID and you use that later for looking up the session. Next time the user goes to the same web page, the browser sends the same ID back, and therefore it's possible to keep safe and establish a session for the service provider with the user and the web browser. There is a restriction to cookies, which is it's limited to a domain name. You can use it with a kind of different levels of the domain, but you cannot have it globally available. That means that if you have a service that spans multiple domains, you cannot use cookies alone to maintain a shared session. The web single sign-on protocol allows you to share a session, or you start at the service provider and you establish a session there. You send a request to an IDP where you also establish a session using cookies, and you then are sent back with the assertion to the service provider, which allows you to have a kind of shared session between multiple services by using the identity provider. So this means that you can go to one service, log in through the IDP, and afterwards a lot of services are available to be accessed without further authentication because of single sign-on. This has a consequence or implication that because the users don't really understand it, they can go to a service that is not really very sensitive at all. Maybe they have loaned a book at the library, they want to extend maybe this is extend the period for how long they can loan it. They log into the IDP and they're finished. If they have high privilege to another service that give you access, for instance, to modify the salary of your co-workers, the implications are very high if your session as IDP is not terminated. So, what do users do when they want to terminate the session? They either, I don't think most people shut down their computer anymore, but they certainly either click the logout button if it's available, or they close the browser. And that's interesting because we have hired the company to do some usability testing while we set up a new IDP, including a new login page. What the users do when they close a browser often is actually closing the tab. And what does that mean? It does mean nothing related to closing the session because it will still be available. So, still, even though there are certainly a lot of reasons for allowing to have the logout functionality, most federations does not offer any kind of logout at all. So why not? Maybe because it was available in the earlier versions of the WebSSO protocols, but also as we will dive into it, we will see that there's a lot of issues about how to implement it. So, if we decided that we wanted to go for supporting logout in our federation, which is something that we thought was a good idea as we were migrating to SAML 2, we have support for it. The first that you may think of, the simplest solution would be just to let the service provider themselves handle logouts. The problem is that if you terminate the session at the service provider, you can be logged out from the service provider, but at the moment you click login, you are sent to the identity provider where your session still exists, and you are sent back and you are logged in again. So simply logging out from a local service only will not work. Perfect. So, what's the next option then? It will be, of course, to extend the logout procedure to also include terminating the session at the IDP. So for that, you can use the protocol elements from SAML2. You can start as a service provider, clicking logout, terminate the session, send a logout request to the identity providers. The identity providers shut down the session and send a logout response back to the service provider. So this is possible, and I think that some federations have tried to do something similar to this, the local plus IDP logout approach, not with SAML2 because it was not available, but with something just making up some URLs or something. I don't know the details. So is this a good solution? I don't think so. And the main reason is that with single sign-on, the boundaries between service providers is kind of washed out because it's very because users do not really understand level single sign-on. You cannot expect the users to know for sure exactly which service providers they are logged into. They go to one service, and also I see that it become more and more popular for institutions to create portals, embedding a lot of hosted services, having the same look and feel, so that users should never really leave their service. If they are also using hosted services, some of them would have to use other domain names, although they look the same. It will establish a new session as another service provider because they're using single sign-on. The user usually do not notice because users will just be logged in automatically using that SSO. So I think that because of this, this solution would not be appropriate. So the next step, as it initially was discussed and explained in the SAML2 profile, there is a single logout profile explaining how to expand the logout protocol to start with one service provider. You log out, terminate the session, you are sent to the IDP, terminate the session, and then the IDP has to maintain a list of all the other service providers that you also are logged into. And then after terminating the IDP session, you send a request and a response to terminate all of the other service providers. So why isn't this a well-deployed solution? Because it seems simple and elegant and should work. Even though the protocol is there and is implemented a lot of places, it's still not widely used, and there are a couple of reasons for that. One of the reasons is that usability related to single logout. When I call single logout, I mean that SAML2 approach where you log out from all the services at once by clicking logout. It's really difficult for the user to understand exactly what will happen when you click logout, because the user has not already understood the concept of dead SSO. The users just go to the services and have access. So some users will expect that he or she is logged out from one service. Different users will expect different of the three approaches. So I think that to make a good usability related to logout, you have to make it extremely explicit exactly what will happen and tell it to the user in a very concrete way. So that was the background before we started creating our own single logout user interface and solution. I will come back to that. We tried a lot of stuff, so this is not something that we just made up and did and it was completed. We have been thinking about this a lot. Something that we thought was that maybe if we name the logout button global logout, then everyone will understand. No. Nobody understands what global logout is, even though for us it might seem like a clear clear reference to what will happen. So another problem with having single logout is the fact that because if you just have the global logout button, then terminate all sessions, and because not all users expect this behavior, there may be a very bad consequence, because users may log into one very critical service, start a transaction that is really important, that is not interrupted, for instance, editing a very large wiki page, then goes to another service, then do the stuff, logs out from that service, and then of course the other service is terminated as well, clicking save on the wiki. Yeah, you have the login page and have to log in again and lost all the, the changes. So this, we have real life examples where service providers require us to provide some kind of mechanism for the user to back out from doing single logout. So we are not allowed from our customers or service providers to implement single logout as SAML2 profiles tell us to do. So we have to find something in between single logout as defined in SAML and SP-IDP logout. Another challenge with SAML2 logout is the fact that you have two different ways of sending the logout request and response messages. You have the front channel and the back channel approach. The back channel approach using SOAP is a bit difficult to implement at the service provider side. And that's another thing that we have struggled a lot with, because service providers are very hesitant to do a lot of implementation work to make logout work. And if we require them to implement SOAP logout, it will be a lot more difficult for them. And the reason is that with SOAP logout, you are doing a back channel call, which means that as a service provider, you have no direct reference to the user from the cookie, which I mentioned earlier, because there is no cookie sense, because there are no direct connection to the browser. So instead, you have to look up the content of the logout request and then extract a reference to your session. And this is very complex to do. Not necessarily, even if you make it in the service provider, you also have to do the same thing in your application, because just terminating the session in the service provider itself is not enough. You also have to terminate. Usually applications have their own session side by side by the SP session. And the alternative to back channel calls is a front channel, which is basically URL redirection. You are redirected to the IP, then redirected back and forth to all the services. The problem, that is elegant because it's easier to implement, but it has a very large drawback, is the lack of robustness. Because if at least one of the service provider fails with a big error screen, for instance, the user is already logged out, trust me, there's a lot of service providers that throws a lot of these nasty error messages to a logout request. So we need to have the best from both of these. We need the robustness and we need the simplicity from the front channel binding. This led us into our solution to the single logout problem, which I'm going to demonstrate to you afterwards. We are only using front channel binding, and that keeps it simple to the service provider. To solve the robustness problem, we never leave the user from the IDP side. Instead, we're using hidden iframes to point the URL where the iframe is looked up will be HTTP URL pointing to the logout request endpoint with a logout request encoded message within. The response is that is sent back to the logout response endpoint, and the session is updated at the IDP so that it knows that it's properly logged out from that service. We use some JavaScript to make some user interface, telling the user what services did it exceed logout from and what did it not exceed logout from. Also, as I said earlier, we need to have the backup option for the user. If the user, for some reason, wants to remain logged in to all the other services, but want to be logged out from the service he initiated the logout from, but also, of course, the IDP as well. So we added that as well. The result is a logout page which to the user will look like this. The user starts with the service, logs in, then hits a standard logout button. The user is logged into 4 services. He initiated the logout from a service called Foodle, but the user is told that he is also logged into these 3 following services, and the user is asked, do you want to log out from all the services above? Yes, all the services, or only Foodle? I can show you the demo, but I can tell you a little bit more about this. As you see, this is when logout is in progress. Right up there, you don't see the iframes because they are hidden. You don't want these ugly error messages to show up to the user. Then you don't want to have a red mark or something saying that this did not respond to the logout. So another kind of cool thing about this is that all the logout requests are sent concurrently, which is also a problem with or a feature about SOAP logout that is possible to implement it in parallel, although no of the implementations of SOAP logout do it in parallel. It's at least possible. But here, the HTTP redirect logout requests are sent in parallel, which make it go a lot quicker than if it was sent sequentially. Yeah. From here, the logout is initiated, and each of the service providers send a logout response, and then some Ajax JavaScript things update the status for each of the services. If something fails, if one service provider is down and not accessible, or if it fails for some reason, it will not get a response back to the IDP, and it will keep spinning, and after some time limit, maybe 10 seconds, we show a message to the user telling that some of your services did not respond to the logout request, and you are encouraged to close your browser or remove all cookies to ensure that you are logged out from these services as well. So I can try to demonstrate this. I hope it will work. Let me see, I have Firefox here, I think. Right. Maybe I should close the browser as I have... okay, I can try. At least, this is another cool thing, but I have set up, to demonstrate this, I have set up one installation with an asterisk in the DNS, allows me to have a limited number of service providers on different domain names. So I automatically created 10 different service providers, and I also created one IDP. As the IDP, I set up a notification source which will automatically log in the user, because if not, I would go through 10 different URLs to 10 different services and then keep logging to all the services. Instead, I will now I have this magic URL that will send me through all the service provider. I'll do that. Now you see here that it's sending authentication request and response back and forth to the IDP on all the 10 services. So after a while, I should be logged into all 10 services. I'm returning to service 1. Here is the attribute from the IDP, and here is the logout button. So now I will click logout, and you see here, this is just example names for these test keys, but these real test services. So these operate on different domains, are real service providers. So I'm going to log out from all of them. Yes, all services, not only this test service. And I'm logged out from all of them. If something failed, I will not go back. I will instead either the wheel will keep spinning, or I will see some error from the So this is something that we have in production in FIDA. It has been in production for a couple of months when we migrated to using Simple SAML for our central IDP. So if you think it's interesting, you might just download and set it up yourself. Just drop me an email if you wonder about how to configure it. You have to enable this logout because the usual SAML2 logout is the default one. So then to the last big question. We have this in production in FIDA. We spent some effort to implement it. So is anyone using it? So I took a look at the logs. We have also a statistics module. We have this graph showing logout, single sign-on, how much it is used. And surprisingly, for all the service providers that's connected, the ratio between single logout, initiated single logout, and single sign-on established service was 1 to 10. I was a bit surprised because I expected that no one will be using it. But it turns out that actually a lot of people are used to click the logout button when they are completed. And it's not, when we think about it, it's not really that surprising, because if you look at all the non-educational services out there, all of them have a logout button. So this thing of not supporting logout is special for educational services, I think, or other that implements the SAML protocol, because logout with SAML2 is a bit tricky, as I have mentioned. The ratio between SSO and SSO vary very much between services. Some services never or very seldom initiate logout. It can have to do with the nature of the service. It's something that you don't feel is very critical, or you just log into to be there. More critical services, which have you are doing this or that, you extend the loan period and then complete it. Services like this have a very high ratio, up to and also above 1 to 2. So that's my presentation. So is there any questions?
Thank you. Surprisingly, demo was working, so we are confident that logout has some future.
Yeah.
Before we log out from this session, we do have something like 10 minutes and usual suspects asking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very interesting presentation. Thank you. We have been talking a lot on this Serena meeting about extending WebSSO to desktop solutions and other kinds of stuff. Could you speculate on how you could implement single sign-on, single sign-out in such a scenario?
A good question, but I don't think I have the right answer.
Speculate.
Well, yeah, immediately I have no thought about it, so I have no solution. It depends on how you implement desktop SSO, because there are not really that many good solutions available that you can use. So I think that to do logout, you first have to have a session that you want to terminate. So it will depend on the nature of the SSO solution that you end up with. Yeah, so Ross.
Thank you. I'll ask a question that doesn't need speculation. What about shibboleth SP? Does the logout work on shibboleth SP?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, we have tested it, so it's working. I think that it might be that they have not implemented the logout in the IDP yet, but yeah, but in our case we are using shibboleth SPs only, so it's working. Yeah. Also, one related to that, it is the case that for some reason, some service providers do not support logout, and then we mark it with in the logout screen. You also will be clearly indicated which services that you are logged into that do not support logout, and tell the user about it, and that it can not automatically be logged out, but has to do it as a service. Yeah.
Okay, Mike here. Actually, single logout was from the beginning in the Liberty specification. Have you looked how they implemented this? They use special web services for this. And command that send over this Liberty infrastructure.
Can you repeat? You said that it was initially a Liberty specification?
Yes.
That's probably true, yes, from the IDFF or something. Maybe
yes.
It was introduced there, yeah.
So they probably use web services, not cookie.
It was web services, yes. And as I said, using web services for logout is a bit tricky to implement on the service provider side. And that's, I don't know if it was web service only in IDFF or it was also the HTTP redirect binding. Do you know? No. So at least in SAML 2 there is an option to do either or. And implement SOAP is a bit tricky for all the applications that want to implement it.
But actually, if you want to make it more general and scalable, probably you still need to imply some requirements to service providers to support SLO.
Yeah, very good point.
Otherwise, if you start using this, you will later find that users will find some way around of this. At least I know one academic website, they use at least 3 tricks to avoid logging in and stopping session and again joining them. So this is like they do not correct web-based, cookie-based logout. And they are using to access this service from different computers. So if you not apply specific requirements to services that are accept this information or command logout or stop service, it will be found some way.
Yeah, I can say that in FIDA we have a requirement for all service providers that join our federation to implement logout. So that's an important aspect, because if you leave it an option to the service provider, probably just 1 in 10 do want to bother to implement it, because it will be some extra work at application level where you integrate with the SAML 2 software. Yeah.
When using shibboleth SP with lazy sessions, an application might be easily left with a working application session without a shibboleth session. Is it a concern for simple SAML PHP as well? So the user can be logged out from shibboleth SP, but not from the application itself.
Yes, that's something that will happen if you have an application, for instance a wiki, and you integrate it with some SAML 2 software, whatever software, it could be shibboleth, simple SAML, whatever. If you have to do some work to integrate single sign-on, but you also have to do some work to propagate logout. Unless it depends on how you integrate SSO, because you could rely on the session inside the SAML2 software and a request for every HTTP request. That's the approach that I have done most of the integration kits that I have created for different wikis and solutions. But it's very common to establish your own session, and then you need to terminate it. And that's why it's very important when you include a new service provider in your federation to do proper testing that they actually have implemented logout correctly. If they are not implementing it correctly, we should ask them to do so. If not, it's better to remove the SAML2 logout endpoint in the metadata showing the user that is not supported than to have it operating with SAML2 logout when it's not really working. I can mention also one thing that I forgot to say, but I was expecting someone to ask about I'm using JavaScript. At least in the research community, there is a large user group that are very hesitant to enable JavaScript on their browsers, maybe also in the universities. So we have made a fallback solution. So this will work when you disable JavaScript, but the user experience will not be equally good. You will be told that some of the service providers failed, but you will not have this live update of what's going on.
Okay. If there are no more questions, let me thank again our speakers. And before we log out, just let me remind you that there is demonstration sessions after the lunch, or actually before the and beginning of the next session, and also please fill in the questionnaires or evaluation forms. Have a good lunch.